Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dr. Carlos Perez. I'd like to welcome you all to Nova Southeastern University. We have an exceptional presentation today on racism and COVID-19 impacting Asian American youth. I will now introduce our panelists. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. As Carlos mentioned, I appreciate you all joining us. I'm going to introduce everyone who will be with us today presenting the webinar and give a little bit of a context of this talk, and then we'll jump into the content. So my name is Shannon Worton. I'm one of the clinical faculty here at NOVA. My primary role is within our school-related clinic and working with young people. And Dr. Kasi?
Hi, my name is Dr. Iryna Kasi, and I'm a full-time faculty here at the Department of Clinical and School Psychology at Nova Southeastern University.
James?
Hi, everyone. I'm James Nguyen, and I am a fourth year in the Clinical Psych doctoral program.
Mable?
Hi, my name is Mable Peng. I'm the fourth year student in the school psychology program, and I'm also a current intern to Nova Southeastern University School.
Thank you. And we do have one more psychology trainee joining us. Her name is Jess, and so you'll hear from her in a little bit. So just to provide some context, several months ago, James and I were in supervision and just processing what was occurring related to the pandemic, and really specifically the racist language used to describe COVID-19. And because we work with young people primarily in our clinic, we really thought how important it would be to provide parents and teachers and schools an opportunity to talk through how to best support students who might be receiving or being the victims of discrimination because of the racist language used to describe COVID-19. So that's really our target population, any young person who might be experiencing that, so that we as providers, our caretakers, can really arm ourselves with knowledge to best support them. So how we've developed this webinar is kind of a parallel process to what we think is helpful to do with young people, to provide an understanding of the history of Asian Americans in this country, the discrimination faced, and then more specifically what's been happening in light of COVID-19, and James will share that with us. And then we'll jump into tips for parents, outline how to ensure safety for kids, and then jump into what schools and teachers can do to support. And so I'll pass it on to Dr. Kasi. She'll share a little bit more before we jump into the content.
Thank you, Dr. Worton. Yeah, and before we proceed with the presentation, we wanted to share with you our approach that we decided to take on when we are developing this presentation and as we were presenting the information that we've learned ourselves. So we chose to look at the concept of racial awareness and racism as not as the binary concept. So one cannot be racist or not racist, right? It's rather a continuum or even a spectrum if you wish. And all of us fall somewhere on that spectrum. You know, some of us are more knowledgeable and some of us are less knowledgeable. Some of us more sensitive and some of us are less sensitive. But the bottom line is that we are all learning and we're trying to do what's best. We're trying to do as parents what's best to provide that sense of safety to our children and educate them around the topics of diversity and racism, and as well as teachers. And so it brings us to the first point of this fixed mindset versus growth mindset. If I have a fixed mindset, I think that I don't know something, I don't know how to do this, I'm a failure, I don't know how to approach these topics. Versus if I take a growth mindset approach, I may say that I may not know much about this topic, but I will learn. I may have said something hurtful to another person, but I will learn from this experience. I will apologize, I will educate myself, and I'll do better next time. And as we are presenting, I want our audience to keep this growth mindset in mind and embark it as we, or if you haven't done so already, as we did it as we were preparing this presentation. And I think I can speak for all of our presenters. We are certainly not experts in this topic. As Dr. Worton said, it caught our interest and we've learned something and we want to share this knowledge with our audience.
Thank you, Dr. Kasi. And this second little point here, the ouch, oops, educate model is something that we find helpful in these conversations, and it could be for any age range. So we're really focusing on young people right now, but it can be applied across the lifespan, and it provides a context so that if we are speaking about potentially sensitive matters and somebody says something that is harmful to another person, it gives that other person permission, if you will, to say ouch, which gives the person who said it permission to say oops and acknowledge that transgression, and then really to have a meaningful conversation related to educating the person about why that is potentially harmful. And so it's something that we keep in the back of our minds when we're talking about this, and hope it to be helpful for you as well. So I'm going to pass it over to James.
You could move on to the next. All right, so first I wanted to just identify terms that we thought were important. So first term is AAPI, and this stands for Asian American or Pacific Islander. And next is xenophobia, which is the dislike or prejudice against people from other countries. And this is actually a quote from Margaret Cho, who is a stand-up comedian and actress. So she says, "When I was a teenager, I was bullied a lot and felt very insecure and very scared and didn't want to live." This really shows kind of like the impact of what bullying can do to someone. And I wanted to start off with just some major historical incidents. I wanted to include this because it's something that I was never taught, and it's through research for this presentation, I found it very intriguing and interesting to know. So the first I want to bring up is the people of state of California versus Hall. And in this case, Hall was convicted of murder on the testimony of a Chinese witness. The case actually focused on whether the evidence that was given by a Chinese person was even deemed admissible. So after 1854, the court ruled that the Chinese people should be added to a list of people who are ineligible to testify against a white man. And that list included Black people, Indian people, and people of mixed descent. After this, it made more incidents of group murders, lynchings, property damage, and robbery. The next important thing that I saw was the Chinese Exclusion Act. This was passed under President Chester A. Arthur, and this was the first time in US American history that a policy was adopted to exclude immigrants based on their race and nationality. So for Chinese people who already immigrated to the US, they were required to have paperwork at all times and carry identification. While doing research, I did find a PBS documentary that was released for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month that went into depth and showed that people were willing to risk their lives running into burning buildings to make sure that they have their paperwork. And this is probably the more well-known thing, and this is the Japanese internment camp. So after the Pearl Harbor attacks of 1941, the US government authorized the removal of more than 110 Japanese Americans from their homes in the western parts of the US. Nearly two-thirds of the people were actually US-born citizens. And after an extensive government review, it was found that the decision was actually fueled by racism and war hysteria. And this was a big thing that I kind of thought drew parallels to what we're going through now. So this was the murder of Vincent Chin in June of 1982. And he was actually murdered on the night of his bachelor party. And this was due to the belief that he was Japanese. And at the time, people of Japanese descent were believed to be taking jobs away from the American auto industry. And the people who actually committed the murder only served probation and were given $3,000 fines each. So now I just want to go into a little bit of what has happened since the start of the pandemic. So with bullying and cyberbullying in general, Asian American students only have 18%, African American students 31%, 28% in Latinx students, and 35% in white students. But whenever race was included, Asian American students had the highest percent of bullying. And this was before any of the pandemic talk has started. So these graphics, or the next couple slides are a little bit of like the graphics. So this one identifies Asian and Black Americans more likely to report negative experience because of their race or ethnicity since the coronavirus outbreak. This one shows that about 4 in 10 Americans say it's more common for people to express racist views about people who are Asian before COVID-19. And this one shows Black and Asian Americans most likely to report adverse experience due to their race or ethnicity during the outbreak. And this one shows that Black and Asian adults are more likely than white and Hispanic adults to worry about being suspicious if they wear a mask. This was interesting because while doing research, and I found that a lot of the times it is a part of Asian cultures just to wear masks in respect for other people. They don't when they're feeling sick. So it's something that I thought was interesting in this time now. So these are some major incidents that I thought were important to include. So a website that was created called Stop AAPI Hate. And this was a place for Asian Americans to kind of report some of the crimes that they experience without actually going to like officials. And from March 19th, 2020 to August 5th, 2020, over 2,500 anti-Asian hate crimes were reported. In March, an Asian American family was attacked by a man thinking that they were Chinese and infecting other people with coronavirus. And this included a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. They were both actually stabbed. In April, an Asian woman was taken out the trash in Brooklyn and was burned by an unidentified liquid, which was believed to be acid. In July, an 89-year-old Asian American woman was actually slapped and set on fire in Brooklyn. And also in July, this one is actually a little bit closer to us in Florida. There was racial slurs painted on cars and nails were placed behind tires and driveway of an Asian American family in New Smyrna Beach. So some of the discrimination doesn't even stop. It also happens in school. So this picture on the left is actually from a 7-year-old second grader. And this was, I think, in April. And a little bit of the backstory, this was kind of passed along in the Asian community. And the mom of the student that wrote this wanted her to express how she felt after something was said during a Zoom class. So the note states, when we did the Zoom meeting, someone said that he didn't like China and Chinese people. This made me feel sad because he was my friend and I'm Chinese. I hope he will stop telling people that because it's mean and wrong. It's wrong because he doesn't know what he is saying. No one knows how the virus started for sure. When you say that you don't like Chinese people, you are saying that you do not like me. I did not start this virus. Thank you for being my friend. And when I read this for the first time, it was very heartbreaking because it's someone that's 7-year-old, like experiencing this. And you could move on to the next. And from the Stop AAPI website, I guess, they conducted a study of 1,000 Asian American students, and nearly 1 in 4 were subject of racist bullying. And this one was actually interesting to me because a University of Missouri professor was actually relieved of their teaching duties after stating that he needed to put on a mask after hearing a student was from Wuhan, China during an online class. And my part is I will pass it on to Dr. Kasi.
Thank you, James. Sharing this information, it's always heartbreaking to hear about these incidents. But the bottom line, it's important for us to hear about this. And as we can see, Asian American in general, as a community, are not new to the racist and xenophobic attacks. They've been happening before COVID-19 happened, and they unfortunately continue experiencing those race-based and religion-based bullying and discrimination and racial attacks after COVID-19 hit. And of course, it's of little comfort to our students and to the families that we're working with who are experiencing this racial attacks because of COVID-19. So before we jumped into the providing some practical tips for parents, I wanted to share a little bit of research that we did in terms of how do parents approach the topics of race, racial awareness, and racism with their children. And so while doing research, I found that Asian American parents are keenly aware of xenophobia and racism. And while these families differ in strategies in terms of how they want to protect their children against racism, most of them are quite clear about the importance of promoting that strong sense of ethnic identity as well as racial awareness. Another study that I found was involved American-born Asian American parents of school-age children. And it found that parents these parents felt more equipped to parent their children and address those topics of race and racism and have these conversations at home, mainly because they had that experience of growing up in the US, and sometimes they have been victims of those racial attacks and discrimination. However, we know that these important and challenging conversations about race and racism must not be limited to families of Asian descent, or as a matter of fact, to any families of color. And that white parents have to discuss these topics with their children as well. And again, when we look at the research that involves white parents, we see that many parents want to do best, but they do worry about talking about race because they have this perception that by talking about race or talking about racism, it will encourage racial bias in children. But what we know is the opposite is true. Not talking about race reinforces racism because children then are left drawing their own conclusions based on limited knowledge that they may have and based on limited life experiences that they have. And so the bottom line is that it's very important for us to understand that we as parents, we as educators play a huge role in helping our children develop more positive attitudes about race and diversity. And so if I was a parent listening to this presentation, my question would be, well, where do I start, right? How do I provide a supportive environment for my children? How do I make them feel a little bit more safer, if not safe? And how do I raise a child that is sensitive and aware about these topics and does not engage in acts of discrimination and bullying and racism? So it brings me to the next slide, and I want to share this quote by a Vietnamese monk who is also known as a world peace activist, and to the field of psychology, probably he's more known for his pioneering teachings on mindfulness. And so he says, our own life has to be our message, right? A very simple quote, but so much content in it. And to me, what it means is, yes, conversations are important, but so much more learning is happening before we even sit down and have that conversation. Children look up to us. They look up to their parents. They look up to their children, to their teachers, to other significant adults in their life, and they model this behavior, right? And so we have to be mindful not only about what we say, but also what we do. Next slide, please. So that brings me to this little acronym that I came up with, again, researching on what information we can share with the parents. And it says READ. Again, READ to me has that I guess, special meaning, because I was brought up in a family where education was probably, if not the most important, one of the very important values that was instilled in me. And so my parents always said, you don't know something, you read about it. You have a question, you read about it, right? And so as a parents approaching these topics of racism, we have to educate ourselves. We have to start by reflecting upon our own values, our own biases, whether they're explicit or implicit, meaning that we have to remember that we all have grown up in a culture with institutional racism. And so as parents, we need to notice any ways in which we might inadvertently give our children impressions about race that we may not always want consciously to promote. We want to encourage curiosity. We want to encourage curiosity about different cultures, about diversity, about learning about different people. And the only way we can do that is by being curious ourselves, right? Modeling that behavior, engaging children with in not only the topics, but activities that kind of develop and promote that sense of diversity. We want to be mindful of our behaviors. We want to avoid stereotyping people and countries. Children can easily generalize negative statements that they hear at home to their friends at school, to their friends in the neighborhood, in their communities. And so focusing on nationality or ethnicity or appearance of those who live where COVID-19 originated can create prejudice, can create anger, can create mistrust for innocent groups of people. And so we have to be clear about our statements, about our biases, and we have to help our children understand their own prejudice. And finally, we want to model, right? We want to model that positive behavior, positive talk. We want to model acceptance and compassion. Again, children take their emotional cues from the significant adults in their life. And so avoid making those statements about any racial, ethnic, and religious groups becomes extremely important. Next slide. Thank you. And so here, if you see this infographic, there are a couple of points I want to make. One is, again, parents often ask, when do I start, right? That's the question that I asked when I became a parent. And just a little disclosure, I have 2 children at home who are biracial. And so I asked myself, when is a good time for me to start introducing these topics and educating them around those? And the bottom line, what we see in the research, is that we need to talk early, and we need to talk often. You know, it's never too early to talk about race, and it's never too late to talk about race. And of course, you want to tailor your conversations to their developmental level, and you're not going to talk to your toddlers the same way you're going to talk to the adolescents, but talk. That's very, very important. Help them process some of the things, educate them in a positive way, explain some of the unfairness that they might see at schools, some injustice that they may see in schools, but bottom line, talk. And the second part of this infographic, that at least for me, that I think is important, is understanding that the concept of race is biologically meaningless. It's more of a social political construct, right? And as that social political construct, it underlies systemic racism. And it does deeply affect how individuals, how different institutions respond to people. And so if we see early on, children tend to focus on the physical differences, right? We see the way they perceive the race in terms of the physical differences that they notice. Maybe the color of the skin, the color of the hair, or texture of the hair, the shape of the eyes. But as they grow, as they become more exposed to different social contexts, they starting understanding and learning that social aspect of what race truly means. And again, for parents, it's important for us to remember to understand that family still is and will always be that first socializing context for the children. The family will give the child their identity, will teach a set of beliefs, will teach a set of values, language, rules of behavior that will govern how they will interact with the world. And so with that in mind, I will pass it to our next presenter, Jess.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kasi. So now I'll talk about how parents can, interact with kids, children. So given that some of the examples James talked about, so it's pretty evident that children and even ourselves as adults are not free from the experiences of racism, the biases, and especially during times of pandemic. And as you see on the news, some communities around the nations, especially of Black or Brown, or in this case Asians, are disproportionately hurting. And as events like COVID-19 hit, specific diverse groups can be targeted. So to help encounter these experiences, parents can help ensure that children are able to see the positive images of diversity and cultures. And so especially showing the positivity that, communities can stand strong in unity. So to help with that, getting exposed to diversity by identifying people of different backgrounds within the community, and using that to promote encouraging talks or discussions that Dr. Kasi emphasized earlier. And so, for instance, if you live in a community of large or small population of Asians, identifying the diverse Asian communities, since we know that there are 50 different Asian nationalities that speak over 100 different languages, even just within the Asian populations, and seeing how they are part of their own communities. And so through these discussions, parents can encourage children to identify someone they know that represent diversity, such as their neighbors, friends, school personnel, healthcare professionals, members of faith community, and then discussing about the specific characteristics, the values, and experiences that children have in common with these groups, as well as talking about what makes these individuals diverse and unique, and how these cultures become unique. And another way to help children is to make personal connection to those who represent diversity in their own lives. So by using personal examples or even stories, may help children learn firsthand the value of getting to know the people whose backgrounds and cultures differ from their own. And so in learning about different cultures, children may learn the value of what's known as the racial and cultural socialization, meaning that as they learn to learn other different cultures and customs, they get to learn about their own cultural backgrounds, their history, and use that to strengthen their own identity, their own ethnic pride, and that can help them improve their self-esteem as a way for them to cope better when they become the target of racism, or when they become pointed at. So I would say, as being an Asian growing up in my own community, one of the things that came up for me was the fear of speaking up. For me was, fear of speaking up about racism, or the experiences that I encountered at school or in the community. So, example, anytime there were the national news about a shooting by an Asian, or any news about an Asian country, my friends or even peers, would associate that event with me. And so, I felt that I didn't know how to react, or, I didn't know what to do about it, or even who to go to. So thinking about those events now, I would have liked to take in those opportunities to share about my culture, or, had adults to guide me or talk, or socialize with them about diversity, which could have, increased those opportunities to turn those negative experiences into more positive experiences. And so, given our own reactions, our experiences, as Dr. Costa mentioned, rather than avoiding the negative, the difficult or negative conversation associated with these difficult feelings, being encouraging to talk and, taking that active approach and reacting in some positive ways, I think would help. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as part of creating the positive experiences, teaching children about the values and the positive influences that role models or heroes have on their lives. So if we teach children about the contributions that people of different various ethnicity have made to society, such as in areas of science, health, military, or even in schools, they're more likely to value the respect, value diverse culture backgrounds as a whole, and more likely to find the commonality than differences. So in a way, it's more like bridging the cultures and finding that commonality and finding community within that. And so learning about the history, identifying the heroes of different backgrounds can help teach children that people of all diversity can have a positive influence on the world, and that they all deserve to be respected and be reminded of the positive values that they represent for the people. And since research shows that humans are largely motivated by setting heroes or role models, we can encourage children to find the role models that they can instill ideals like courage, honor, bravery, loyalty, family, and things like that can help define their identity as well. Next slide, please. Okay. As children learn best from direct or hands-on experiences, encourage children, give children opportunities to interact with people from diverse backgrounds. So even when parents, may try their best to help children respect diversity, treating others fairly, it may become more natural and clear for them when they engage in activities that they can see themselves and be included in some activities that they can make positive contributions. So when they actively participate in these hands-on or direct activities, that can help them build empathy, and that can show them examples of how coming together can bring commonalities. So for instance, parents can help children look for ways to help or make contributions to society, and that can, or society benefiting everyone. And this can be done through volunteering in the community, undertaking projects to help those in need from diverse backgrounds. And this may not be ideal, during pandemic or times like this, but finding something that may not require physical activities, such as writing pen pal notes, sending out positive messages to, different parts of the world through internet, or being creative to find activities like that. Okay. And as youth learn about diversity, we want to encourage sharing information about the family or culture customs to teach that, all people have their special, unique beliefs and rituals and practices that they may not be familiar with. So this may include, learning about how, different people or cultures communicate, the nonverbals that they may not be familiar with, and even ways different family backgrounds or cultures handle difficult situations, like in times of pandemic. And school is a great place to have, students learn about each other's culture, since, there will be students from diverse backgrounds. And this can help create understanding of inclusion and help create the message that all people are valuable and deserve to be respected. Okay. So you want to provide as much exposure to other cultures through books, pictures, music, arts and crafts, games, television, and film. But here we want to focus on specifically books. So research supports that creating a home environment where books reflect many racial and ethnic groups can help reduce what's known as ethnocentric bias, meaning that one judging from other cultures from one's own cultural lens. So it might be helpful to use young adult literature books to discuss about diversity, taking a multicultural lens or approach in discussing various cultural views and talking about diversity related issues. Some of the benefits to reading diverse books are that, that helps inviting children to use their imaginations. These help to expand their vocabularies, develop empathy, gain a better understanding of themselves, not only themselves, but also other people who are different from them. Books can also help increase opportunities for youth to understand that despite the differences, that people do share some common feelings like love, sadness, joy, anger, and other factors like desire for fairness, goals, and ambitions. And importantly, books can also be a powerful learning and coping tools when young readers can really connect with the characters and understand, what the characters are going through, and they are able to really share and empathize given, what they're experiencing as well. So later in our presentation, Dr. Worton will, mention about bibliotherapy and that, how that can be used to guide discussion about racism and such. So for the next couple slides, we'll go over some of the resources and books. We'll just kind of breeze through it, but yeah, here are some resources that we put forward. Okay, and now we'll have Mable talk about safety.
Thank you, Jessica, Dr. Kasi, and James for sharing so much information about the historical background about this matter, and also tips for parents and caregivers of how to address the issue. As parents, caregivers, and teachers, we want to do our best to ensure our children or students' sense of safety wherever they are. And in order to ensure their sense of safety, we need to first know what to look for. What are the warning signs? When do we know if our children or students are experiencing discrimination, stress, anxiety, or trauma related or not related to COVID-19? So first of all, what to watch out? We need to keep our eyes open. And we also need to understand that our children, just like adults, can experience mental health issues. They are equally sensitive, just like adults. When children can be concerned about actions or statements that they hear or see in the news, or recent events in their communities or reported in the media may cause children or students to fear that they or their families and friends might be targeted because of their gender, race, cultural or religious background, sexual orientation, or immigration status. And on the slide here, I have listed some events or situations that are examples of stressors or traumatic events students might be experiencing, and that might lead to mental health problem. And here, the first one is worrying about schoolwork or grades. We know right now many school districts are still doing remote study, and because of internet and other technology issues, there are many struggles and hiccups in between, and it could affect our children's academic performance. And some students, it can cause them to be very much worried about their performance. And other stuff is the lost opportunity that instead of going in person, they'll miss their normal playground time, losing the opportunity to actually go into school, not just for education, but for socialization, interactions with peers and friends. That are something our children are missing in the time of pandemic, and that it's something we can put it as major life changes. And also other problems may cause maybe stressors or cause trauma, problems with friends, bullying, or peer pressure, knowing some close one that are injured or they're sick, or separation, and other situation or events we need to watch out for is abuse, not only at school, but on social media as well, because besides physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, cyberbullying is something that's very big and happen a lot right now in this society. And moving to the next slide, we know some events that might cause the problem, but what exactly we need to look out for. So there are some warning signs, and we can put them in two major categories. The first one is external, and the second one is internal. So for the external, warning signs are hyperactivity, aggressions or throwing tantrums, crying, excessive crying, trouble sleeping or nightmares. Some examples of internal warning signs are excessive fears, worries, or sudden changes on school performance, on weight, like gaining a significant amount of weight in a short period of time, or losing too much weight in a short period of time. Also, change of appetite, withdrawal from friends or social interactions, mood swings, energy levels are also some warning signs as well. Prolonged sadness, depression, racing thoughts is another sign of anxiety, or thoughts of death or suicide, or engaging in self-injury, or frequent anger or easily irritated are also some signs we need to watch out. Then what can we do if we saw this sign? First of all, of course, we want to create a safe, secure, and dependable atmosphere environment at home. If your children is anxious due to pandemic, we could engage in actions such as clean our home more frequently, ensuring our children that we have enough hand sanitizers and masks if they need to go out. Or emphasize that there are many adults out there in the society and in the world that are fighting, that will help to ensure that children and their families are safe and remain together. Or, for example, if your children is stressful and anxious about their academic achievement or performance due to problems raised by distant learning, we can teach them stress management skills. We can help teaching them like how to manage their time better, such as planning their days. We can put a chart and list out the tasks they need to finish and check mark, or rank the tasks by priority, help them to get organized. Or we should consult with teachers if that's really impacting our kids' performance, and that's and teachers always help source that we can reach out. Also keep in close communication with teacher, because sometimes teachers, they might observe something in the classroom which you could not. So remain a close communication with teachers can greatly help. Also set limits around television and social media viewing, because that way we can help prevent cyberbullying and also prevent increasing level of anxious due to watching news, too much news. And of course, spend time with your kid on doing activities together, hang out, or help them how to relax together. And we also can engage in active listening, or having open conversations. Like Dr. Kasi mentioned, it's never too early to discuss the topic of racism. Also, by having an open conversation, we're showing our children that we really care about their feelings. And at the end of this slide, it says report. So whenever you observe something, please make sure that report, because sometimes it's really beyond our reach, and sometimes we need outside help, like from teachers or other agencies or organizations to intervene. And moving to the next slide is I want to mention to be a role model, because our children looks up to us. They learn so much more from what they see than what they listen. So with that being said, as adults, we should also have good habits on how to take care of ourselves. Not only our physical, but also mental health. Like with that reminds me of my last airplane trip, that the flight attendants mentioned how important it is to put our oxygen mask first and then attend to our children. That is not an action of selfish. It's actually taking care of ourselves can better take care of our children. It's just like of our phone, we need to recharge ourselves too. We need time to process our feelings. And with that, your kids seeing how you are taking care of selves, they can look up to you. So when they are feeling stressful or anxious or experiencing discrimination, they know what to do. Also, like spend time and do things that you enjoy with your family and friends. It's also another way of self-care. That way your children seeing you doing that, they know, oh, when I'm stressed, I can reach out to my friends and reach out to my families. And the most important part is reach out, know that you're never alone, because sometimes we really need outside help. So on the next slide, here are some professionals or people that you can reach out for. Is administrator at school counselor, mental health coordinator, social workers, school psychologists, and resource officers that you can seek help and advice from. And on the next slide, here are a list of organizations or some resources online that you can, just for you, when not only you, but your children are struggling with fears of stress. So please reach out if you really need help. And with that, I'm gonna turn over to Dr. Worton.
Thank you, Mable. So we're going to spend some time talking about tips for schools, teachers, and administrators. And I think the tips part is a little bit of a misnomer, because it's not as easy as a how-to guide, like a quick fix, and then the problem is solved. This is going to be a constant conversation and constant intentional actions and integration of many of the things that we've spoken about today within homes and within schools. So keep that in mind as you listen, so that hopefully from now moving forward, we can all be part of this process together. I put this here, it's a quote by Iryna Kasi, to give us a different perspective on the term microaggressions. When we look into the literature, it's used often, though it might not be fully accurate, and perhaps the term racial abuse is more accurate to describe the experience of Asian American youth and what's being experienced due to the racist language used to describe COVID-19. And that's particularly important in light of what Mable just shared. She outlined many warning signs and risk factors for young people, and it's critical that we know that racial abuse can lead to a lot of mental health concerns, and knowing the warning signs gives us something to hold on to, so that we can then reach out to those youth and make sure they're having the support that they need. When we look in the literature, there's many themes that have been found related to microaggressions or racial abuse among the Asian American community, specifically with young people. And one of the main ones that stood out to me is invisibility. And when researchers talked to adults who reflected on their time in school-age years, one of the things they often said was that, yes, racial conversations took place and we talked about racial issues, but often those conversations did not center or specifically talk about the Asian American community. And it brings me back to the beginning of this presentation, where we said it's really a parallel process, and it's why we found it so necessary to include some of the historical happenings, if you will, in this country, so that we can create more visibility for what the Asian American communities experience, and then especially now what young people are experiencing during the pandemic. Another thing that came out of the literature was how stressful it can be for young people to deal with racial abuse, which makes sense, right? And one of the things that they reported is that a lot of time is spent ruminating and thinking through things like, did that just happen? Did this person just say that? Should I respond? How should I respond? And just the act of spending energy and time thinking about this was very stressful and triggered a lot of anxiety. And so one thing that we can do is provide steps that young people can take, so that they don't have to think in the moment, they already know how they might respond. Primarily ensuring their safety. And we want to teach them that it's not always safe to respond to racial abuse, and especially for little ones. We want to make sure that they're constantly safe, and also think through, if they want to respond, what they hope to get out of it. Who's the person who said something that's hurtful or harmful to them? What's the relationship? How might they navigate this conversation? And there's a few things that we can teach them to do. One is to use I statements, which we commonly talk about in the field of psychology, and putting the focus on what it was like for them. So if we put the focus on the other person, you said this, it creates defensiveness. If we put the emphasis on us, it hurt my feelings when I heard you say XYZ, then it can often create a more meaningful, if you will, dialogue and perhaps reduce the other person's defenses. Asking what did you mean by what you said is a great response because it also gives the other person the opportunity to sit and reflect on really what they meant and what the significance is of it, and perhaps how it could be misinterpreted or how it could be unintentionally harmful to the other person. Another technique is to really focus on the relationship and saying something like your friendship or our relationship is really important to me and I want you to know how it impacts me when you say XYZ. Mabel mentioned this, but it's worth saying again, seeking support. So we want every young person to know that it's helpful and it's normal and it's okay to seek support. I'm very fond of saying everyone can do better with a coach. And I think it creates an analogy for young people. If we look at top athletes or top performers, top whomever, they still have a coach and we can also benefit from a coach, and it's a sign of strength and it's a sign of growth and it's a sign of bettering ourselves. And especially when young people are experiencing racial abuse, we don't want them to feel like they have to navigate that alone. And something that Jess mentioned earlier was really poignant for me. She said that she wished that adults in her life when she was a young person were having these conversations, and maybe she would feel that sense of support when she was the receiver of those instances. And there's another quote here that there's no statute of limitations, right? So if we have a young person who comes to us and something happened a month ago and they're thinking now I really want to address it with my friend or my teacher or whomever, that's okay. We can walk them through those steps. If they're the one who makes the transgression, and this is another important conversation to build into schools, we can say things sometimes that we didn't necessarily mean to be harmful, but then we later learn are harmful. It's important to teach young people to acknowledge the transgression, to avoid becoming defensive, and really take that listening ear to learn from the other person about why what they said was hurtful to the other person. So let's talk about some specific things for teachers and for schools, and one is having continuous trainings on the Asian American culture and identity. And the word continuous, again, important because this isn't a one and done, and so we should look into our diversity-based work, our history classes, and make sure that community is represented. To practice anti-racism, there are so many resources available about anti-racism, and specific to this conversation, making sure that we are not condoning racist-based language used to describe COVID-19. And if we hear that within our schools, our classrooms, making sure we always respond and state that we don't tolerate that kind of language and have a conversation about it. Establishing visibility and representation. So this could be anything from books in the library that have Asian American characters, it could be history books, it could be literature classes, it could be posters around the school, making sure there's representation, and that kind of ties to the promoting conversations within the classrooms as well. Having a mentorship system is particularly important. So if there are not teachers or school personnel or staff members who are Asian American, it could be really meaningful for young people, for the school to develop a mentorship system or to help young people connect to others who look like them so that they can have a point person, if you will, to go to and to process some of the things that they might be experiencing that having lived experiences is really helpful for. Bullying prevention. So because many of our classrooms are remote right now, kids might not know how to respond to bullying or how to report bullying when it happens within their own homes from remote learning. And so if there's any changes to bullying reporting guidelines, making sure all kids, all teachers are aware of it, and it's helpful to have it visible as well, perhaps on the school website, so there's a place for kids to go and know what to do. A general tip for bullying is role playing, how to respond. So we can have conversations with young people and say, if this happens, here's what you might say, and then have them do it, right? So that they don't have to, again, think on the spot. They've already practiced this skill. And to create a culture of belonging, and I'm gonna skip really quick and then I'll go backward. This quote was so meaningful and hurt my heart to read. So it was an instance where somebody was walking down the street and a person said, go back to China. And he said, I was born in this country. How else to prove I belonged? And I thought, wow, how important is it for us as adults to make sure we're allowing kids to feel like they belong? And a big difference between fitting in and belonging, right? We want to create a culture where we are aware of our vulnerabilities and we're having these open conversations and we're making sure there's representation and visibility. We don't want to put the burden on young people. And if you're interested in that, there's great work done by Brene Brown, and this is really her mission to talk about belonging and wholeheartedness and vulnerability. And I definitely recommend reading some of her works, and specifically some of her works that relates to either parenting or for kids. It's really meaningful for establishing a sense of belonging. So one specific tool we can use is books. And books are great, especially for little ones, but definitely across the age range. And not only to have books, again, that establish visibility and representation, but to talk about them. So this book is about a little girl who joins the school and is made fun of for her name. And so perhaps you read this book with kids in the class and then you ask questions like, how do you think she's feeling? Have you had similar experiences? What would you have done if you were in her situation and kids were saying that to you? Or what can she do now? So it gives them a character to relate to. And then through asking these questions allows kids to develop empathy, which is so critical when we're teaching cultural sensitivity. Another quote about belonging. So to kind of wrap us up, another quote by Ibram Kendi, and he really says that the good thing is that we can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines not who we are. And for me, it's important to end this way because our hope is that this conversation sparks an interest in all of us. This is such a small piece of what the conversation could be. So hopefully we can take action steps to make sure we're enacting a lot of these anti-racist principles and values, specifically for this webinar related to the Asian American community. And I will say we ran out of time for questions, but I'm gonna put my email and Dr. Cassie's email in the chat box. So anyone can feel free to reach out to us if you want any of these resources, and we will forward it to Jess, to Mable, and to James so that they can have access as well.
Well, before we lose everyone, is there any final thoughts?
I want to say thank you again for everyone who joined us. Hopefully you took a small piece away from this conversation and can bring it to your own home or schools or wherever you are.
And before we lose everybody, Dr. Worton, you're actually working very closely with our clinics. Can you tell us a little bit of what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm in Psy.D, or school-related clinic. So we primarily conduct comprehensive evaluations for kids and adults, anything from school-related concerns to more mental health-related concerns. We also provide psychotherapy. So we're a training clinic. Our psychology trainees in both our clinical and school programs are part of our clinic, and myself and a few of the other psychologists who are with us provide supervision. And so usually what happens is a parent or a teacher or someone in the child's life will refer them to our clinic, and then we will work with them to complete the evaluation or to bring them on for individual therapy.
And this is just one of the specialty clinics that we have at NSU's College of Psychology. If you have or you have anyone in your circle that needs assistance with the Psychological Services Center, we can be reached at 954 NSU CARE. That's 954-678-2273. I'm going to give everyone that number. Again, if you joined us later on, many of you have joined us before. We are at Nova Southeastern University. We're the College of Psychology, and we offer bachelor's, master's, specialist, and doctoral programs in psychology and related areas. And NSU is a robust institution. I'm personally here in Davie, Fort Lauderdale. We've got a great law school, medical programs, and one of the things that's NSU has really been on the rise, and as many schools have had some difficulties, we've seen our largest undergraduate class this year. And one of the reasons that this is NSU has always been ahead of the curve in technology and distance education, and we were really just ready. And I think that diversity in what we offer and the diversity in our student population is one of our strengths here in South Florida, and one of the reasons I feel quite comfortable here. I've been one of those people that's been told to go back to my country, and I think this is my country. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you all.